Chapter 1. Something happened a while back that stayed with me longer than I expected it to. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, and if you were looking from the outside, you probably wouldn't have even noticed it. I was sitting across from a girl, not on some formal date, just a regular setting, regular conversation, nothing special about it. There were other people around, noise in the background, distractions everywhere, but somehow none of that mattered once I started paying attention to what was actually happening. Because what stood out wasn't what I was doing, it was what I wasn't doing. At some point during that conversation, I realized I wasn't trying to impress her at all. I wasn't thinking about what to say next. I wasn't trying to keep her engaged. I wasn't adjusting myself to get a certain reaction. I was just there, speaking the way I naturally would, responding without filtering everything through how it might land. And the more I stayed in that state, the more I noticed her leaning into it. Not in an obvious way, but in small shifts, in how she paid attention, in how she responded, in how present she became. It didn't make sense at first, because it went against everything most people assume about attraction. You'd expect effort to create more interest, more attention to create more engagement, more intention to create a stronger connection. But what was happening in that moment felt different from that. It felt like the absence of effort was doing more than effort ever could. And once I noticed that, I couldn't stop noticing it in other situations. You've probably experienced something similar, even if you didn't recognize it at the time. A moment where you weren't trying, where you weren't thinking about the outcome, where you were just being yourself without adjusting for approval. And somehow, that's when things felt the most natural, the most engaging, the most real. It's easy to overlook those moments because they don't feel like something you're actively doing. But when you look back at them, you realize how different they felt compared to when you were trying to make something happen. The more I paid attention to that, the more patterns started showing up. I started seeing how attraction shifts depending on how you carry yourself, not just what you say or do. It's in how you respond, how you hold your attention, how you move through the interaction without needing something from it. That presence creates a certain feeling, something that can't be forced or manufactured. And when that feeling is there, it changes how the other person experiences you without needing explanation. You might think this comes from confidence, and in a way it does, but it's deeper than that. It's not just about feeling confident. It's about not being pulled by the interaction itself. When you're grounded in that way, you're not chasing reactions, you're not adjusting to get a certain outcome, you're just there. That changes the dynamic because it removes the pressure that usually exists in those situations. And when that pressure is gone, things start to flow differently. You can feel the difference when you're in that state versus when you're trying to make something happen. When you're trying, there's a subtle tension behind everything you do. Even if you don't notice it, it shows up in your tone, your timing, your responses, in ways that are hard to explain but easy to feel. And that tension changes how the interaction unfolds because it shifts the balance without you realizing it. It creates a dynamic where you're leaning in more than you should, when you're not in that state, when you're just present without needing anything from it. Everything feels lighter. You're not thinking ahead, you're not overanalyzing, you're not trying to control how things go. You're just responding to what's happening in front of you. That kind of presence carries weight in a way that doesn't need to be forced. It makes the interaction feel natural, and that natural feeling is what people are drawn to. You don't need to say anything special to create that effect, because it's not coming from the words themselves, it's coming from how you're showing up in that moment. That's why you can say something simple and it lands, or say something thought out and it falls flat. The difference isn't in the content, it's in the energy behind it. And once you start seeing that clearly, it changes how you approach everything. If you've ever had a moment like that, where things just felt easy without you trying to make them that way, you already understand what this is pointing toward. Most people overlook it because it doesn't feel like a strategy. It feels like nothing. But that nothing is exactly what creates the shift. It's the space where you're not forcing anything, not chasing anything, not trying to control anything. And that's where everything starts to change. If this is starting to connect in a way you didn't expect, drop a comment and just say, "I felt that," or something simple. Not because it does anything for me, but because it makes you acknowledge that you've experienced this yourself. And if you stay with this, you'll start seeing how this plays out in ways you probably didn't notice before. Chapter 2. It didn't look like anything special from the outside, just two people talking in a place where conversations happen all the time. You wouldn't have picked him out of the room as someone doing anything different, and that's exactly what made it stand out once you paid attention. He wasn't louder than anyone else, wasn't trying to command attention, wasn't doing anything that looked impressive on the surface. But somehow, the energy around him felt different, like the interaction wasn't something he was trying to hold together. And that difference showed up in how she responded to him without needing to be explained. He wasn't rushing his words or trying to fill every silence that came up between them. There were small pauses, moments where nothing was said, and he didn't move to fix them. He let them exist without treating them like a problem, and that alone changed the rhythm of the conversation. You could see how relaxed he was in those gaps, how he wasn't reaching for something to keep things going. That ease created a kind of space that most people don't allow, and that space pulled her in without him having to do anything extra. At one point, she asked him something simple, nothing deep, just a regular question that most people would answer quickly and move past. He answered it, but not in a way that felt rushed or overly thought out, just direct and grounded. Then, he leaned back slightly, not physically in a way that made it obvious, but in how he held his attention. He didn't follow up immediately, didn't try to build on it, didn't try to keep her engaged. And that's when you could see her lean in just a little more, like she felt the shift even if she didn't think about it consciously. It became clear that he wasn't trying to keep her interested, and because of that, she became more interested on her own. There was no sense of him chasing the interaction, no feeling that he needed something from it. He was just present, responding when he felt like it, not when he thought he should. That created a balance that felt natural, something that didn't need to be forced or managed. And when that balance exists, it changes how the other person experiences you without needing explanation. You've probably been in situations where you felt the opposite of that, where you were trying to keep things alive, trying to maintain momentum, trying to avoid any moment where things might slow down. That effort feels necessary when you're in it, like if you stop, everything will fall apart. But watching that interaction showed something different, something that most people don't realize. The more you try to hold something together, the more it feels like it needs to be held together. He wasn't worried about losing her attention, and that showed up in everything he did without needing to say it. There was no urgency behind his responses, no pressure in how he carried himself. He wasn't trying to prove anything, wasn't trying to impress her, wasn't trying to create a certain outcome. And because of that, the interaction felt lighter, more natural, more engaging without effort. That's what made it stand out, because it went against what most people assume they need to do. You might think that comes from experience or confidence built over time, and in some ways it does. But it's more about how you relate to the interaction itself, how much weight you place on it. When you place too much weight on it, everything starts to feel heavier, more important than it actually is. That weight changes how you move, how you respond, how you show up. And the other person feels that difference, even if they don't consciously think about it. When you remove that weight, the interaction shifts in a way that doesn't need to be forced. You're no longer trying to create something, you're just allowing it to unfold. That creates a different kind of presence, one that feels grounded and not easily influenced. And that presence changes how people respond to you, because it feels stable in a way that doesn't depend on their reactions. It's not something you perform. It's something you carry without thinking about it. You start to realize that attraction builds in those small moments where nothing is being forced, where the interaction isn't being managed. It's in how you hold yourself when there's nothing to prove, nothing to gain, nothing to lose in that moment. That state creates a kind of ease that most people don't experience because they're too focused on making something happen. And that focus is what creates the tension that pushes things in the wrong direction. You don't need to change what you say to create that shift. You need to change how you're approaching the interaction itself. The words follow that naturally, without needing to be controlled or adjusted. When you're grounded in that way, everything you say carries a different weight. It feels real, not calculated, not forced, not shaped for approval. And that's what people respond to, even if they don't realize why. Watching that made something click in a way that stayed with me long after that moment ended. It wasn't about copying what he did. It was about understanding what was behind it. That understanding changes how you move without needing to think about it constantly. And once you see it clearly, it becomes harder to go back to how you were approaching things before. Chapter 3. You start noticing it when you look back at your own conversations, not while you're in them, but after they've already played out. Something about the way you were texting feels slightly off when you read it again, even if you couldn't feel it in the moment. The tone shifts in places you didn't expect, the pacing changes without you realizing it, and there's a subtle sense that you were trying to guide things instead of just being in them. It's not obvious enough to call out immediately, but it's consistent enough to make you pause. And once you see it once, it becomes easier to see it again. There are messages where you can feel the effort behind them, even if the words themselves look normal. You can tell when you were thinking too much, when you were trying to land something a certain way, when you were hoping for a specific response. That intention sits underneath the message in a way that doesn't need to be explained. It changes how it reads, how it feels, how it's received, and even if the other person doesn't consciously think about it, they still pick up on it in some way. Then there are moments where your messages feel completely different, where you weren't thinking about any of that. You said what came naturally, sent it without hesitation, and moved on without checking how it landed. Those messages feel lighter when you read them back, more direct, more grounded. There's no extra weight behind them, no hidden intention trying to push things forward. And interestingly, those are usually the moments where the conversation feels the most engaging. That difference doesn't come from what you said. It comes from where you were when you said it. When you're grounded, your messages reflect that without effort. When you're not, they carry a kind of tension that shows up in subtle ways. You might not notice it while you're typing, but it becomes clear when you step back and look at it objectively. And once you see that pattern, it changes how you understand what's actually happening. You might realize that the moments where you felt most in control of the conversation weren't the ones where you were trying the hardest. They were the ones where you weren't thinking about control at all. You were just responding to what was in front of you without trying to shape the outcome. That kind of presence creates a natural flow that doesn't need to be managed. It allows the conversation to move in a way that feels balanced instead of forced. At the same time, you start recognizing how quickly things shift when you move away from that state. A small change in how you feel about the interaction can affect everything that follows. You become more aware, more intentional, more focused on how things are going instead of just being in them. That awareness turns into adjustment, and those adjustments change how your messages feel. It's subtle, but it builds over time until the dynamic feels completely different. You can feel it when you start waiting for her replies more than you used to, when you check your phone more often without realizing it. That shift in attention changes how you show up, even if you're not consciously thinking about it. It creates a kind of dependency on the interaction that wasn't there before. And that dependency shows up in your messages in ways that are hard to hide. It affects your tone, your timing, your overall presence in the conversation. When that happens, you're no longer just texting, you're reacting to the interaction itself. You're responding based on what just happened instead of where you actually are. That reactive state creates inconsistency in how you communicate. Some messages feel grounded, others feel slightly off, even if the difference isn't obvious on the surface. And that inconsistency is what starts to shift the dynamic in a way you don't always notice right away. You might think fixing that comes from controlling your responses more carefully, from choosing your words more strategically. But that approach keeps you in the same space, just with more effort behind it. The more you try to manage it, the more you stay in that reactive state. And that's what creates the tension in the first place. It's not about managing the conversation better, it's about not letting the conversation manage you. Once you understand that, you start paying attention to how you feel before you even pick up your phone. You notice whether you're grounded or if you're already being pulled by the interaction. That awareness changes how you respond without needing to think about it. It brings you back to a place where your messages come naturally again. And when you're in that state, everything feels different without you needing to force it. You begin to see that mastering this isn't about learning what to say. It's about understanding how you show up. The words follow that naturally, without needing to be controlled. And once you see it clearly, you stop focusing on the surface level and start paying attention to what actually drives the interaction. Chapter 4. Your phone is face down on the table, and for once you're not thinking about it. You're in the middle of something else, your attention fully on what's in front of you, and the conversation exists somewhere in the background without pulling you back into it. Minutes pass, maybe longer, and nothing in you feels the need to check. That feeling used to be different, used to come with a kind of low-level tension that sat underneath everything else you were doing. Now it's quiet, and that quiet changes more than you expect. When you eventually pick your phone back up, the message is there, but your reaction to it feels different. You read it once, maybe twice, and instead of rushing into a response, you just sit with it for a second. There's no urgency pushing you to reply immediately, no pressure telling you to keep things moving. You respond when it feels natural, not when it feels necessary. And that difference shows up in how your message comes across, even if the words themselves are simple. You're no longer trying to create momentum, and because of that, the conversation carries itself in a way it didn't before. There's space in it now, room for things to breathe without feeling like they're falling apart. That space allows both sides to show up without forcing anything. It removes the sense that you need to hold everything together, and when that sense is gone, the interaction feels lighter without losing its depth. You also notice how your tone stays consistent regardless of what she says or how she says it. You're not adjusting your energy to match hers in a reactive way, you're staying steady in your own. That steadiness creates a kind of balance that wasn't there before. It makes your presence feel more grounded, less influenced by small shifts in the interaction. And that grounded presence carries through everything you send. At the same time, you're not trying to impress or entertain constantly. You're not filling every message with something extra just to keep her engaged. You say what you feel like saying, and you leave it at that without adding more to compensate. That simplicity gives your messages a kind of clarity that doesn't need to be dressed up. It feels direct, real, and easy to engage with. You start to see how much of texting is shaped by how you feel before you even type anything. If you're pulled in, your messages reflect that, even if you try to hide it. If you're grounded, they reflect that just as clearly. That connection becomes obvious once you pay attention to it. And once you see it, you stop trying to separate what you say from how you feel. There's also a shift in how you handle silence, how you let the conversation pause without rushing to fill it. Those pauses don't feel uncomfortable anymore. They feel normal. They don't signal something going wrong, they're just part of how things move. That change removes a lot of the pressure that used to exist in those moments, and without that pressure, the interaction feels more natural overall. You might notice how she responds differently when the conversation feels like that. There's less tension, more ease, more willingness to engage without being pulled. It's not something you asked for, it's something that happens because of how you're showing up. And because it's not forced, it doesn't feel temporary, it feels stable in a way that doesn't depend on constant effort. That stability changes how you experience the interaction as a whole. You're no longer trying to keep something alive. You're just part of it as it unfolds. You're not chasing anything, not holding on to anything, not trying to control anything. You're just there, responding when it feels right, letting things move at their own pace. And that way of being carries more weight than anything you could try to manufacture. You begin to realize that the shift wasn't in what you learned to say, it was in how you learned to exist within the conversation. That understanding changes everything without needing to break it down into steps. It becomes something you carry into every interaction naturally, and once it clicks, it's hard to go back to how you were before. Chapter 5. You send the message and don't even remember exactly what you wrote a few minutes later, and that's when you realize something has shifted in a way that feels almost unfamiliar. It's not that you don't care. It's that you're no longer holding on to every detail of the interaction like it determines something about you. The message leaves your hands, and your mind doesn't stay attached to it, doesn't replay it, doesn't question it. That kind of detachment feels calm, steady, and strangely powerful in a way that doesn't need to be announced. And once you experience that, it becomes clear how different it is from how you used to approach things. You're still present when you're in the conversation, still engaged, still paying attention to what's being said. But the moment you step away, your attention returns to your own life without resistance. There's no pull dragging you back to your phone, no urge to check for a response every few minutes. That separation creates a kind of balance that wasn't there before, something that allows the interaction to exist without consuming your focus. And that balance changes how everything feels, both for you and for her. You begin to notice how your words carry more weight when they come from that place. They don't need to be long or detailed to be effective because they're grounded in how you actually feel. There's no extra layer of intention trying to shape the outcome, no hidden effort to keep things moving. That clarity makes your messages easier to receive, easier to respond to, easier to engage with. It removes the friction that comes from trying too hard without you needing to think about it. At the same time, you're more comfortable letting things unfold without trying to guide them. You're not steering the conversation toward a specific direction, not trying to control how it progresses. You're just part of it, allowing it to move naturally without interference. That approach creates a different kind of interaction, one that feels more real and less managed. And when something feels real, it becomes more engaging without needing effort. You also become more aware of what actually matters in the interaction and what doesn't. Small details that used to pull your attention don't carry the same weight anymore. You're not focused on timing, on wording, on how things might be interpreted. You're focused on being present in the moment and letting that presence shape how you communicate. That shift simplifies everything without making it feel limited. You might notice how much easier it becomes to stay consistent in how you show up. Your tone doesn't fluctuate based on small changes. Your pace doesn't shift based on her responses. You're steady in a way that doesn't need to be maintained consciously. That steadiness creates a kind of reliability in the interaction that feels natural instead of forced. And that reliability makes the conversation feel more grounded overall. You start to see how attraction builds in those small moments where nothing is being forced. It's in how you carry yourself when you're not trying to make something happen. It's in how you respond when you're not thinking about the outcome. That state creates a kind of ease that most people don't experience because they're too focused on doing something. And that ease is what makes everything else fall into place. If this clicked for you in a way that feels different from what you've heard before, drop a comment and just say, different perspective, or something simple that reflects what you're thinking. That acknowledgement matters more than you think, because it marks the moment where something actually shifts in how you see things. And if you've been caught in that cycle of overthinking before, you already know how much this changes once you understand it. If you want more of this, where things get broken down in a way that actually changes how you move instead of just what you think, stay connected. Because once you start seeing interactions like this clearly, you don't go back to guessing or trying to force things into place. It becomes something you carry naturally, and that's what makes the difference without needing to prove it.